Clark already gave a short introduction. I am from Brazil. My background is in electrical engineering. Here in Germany, I'm doing my Ph.D. at the Institute for Technology Assessment and System Analysis, the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. In our institute, I'm part of the research group, Socio-Technical Energy Futures. Yeah, as Clark also already mentioned, we have already worked together, in particular, my supervisor, Saurabh, Mary Jane, and Clark, in the project related to the social value of energy that we have conducted the last year in Nepal, Philippines, Uganda, and Bolivia. And recently we got another project approved and in the Brazilian Amazon. And therefore, I think that there are a lot of synergies between our research groups. Let's move on. This is a kind of motivation for this talk. I'm quite sure that these numbers are not new for you, but Saurabh told me that he plans to upload this talk in the internet. So I thought that these numbers could be interesting for a more broad audience later on. So basically, these numbers means the amount of people living without access to modern energy services, or those people living in energy poverty, whose lives are severely impacted by energy deprivations. Well, we should also recognize that these people are not only energy poor, but are also poor in multi dimensions. So today, we can say that we have 1 in 3 people around the world that have no access to clean means of cooking, and 1 in each 10 people have no access to electricity. And most of these people live in rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia. Well, if we look to the numbers for 2030, we can see that the numbers of people living without access to modern energy services are not expected to change dramatically under current trends. And this means that we are not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, that aims to universalize energy access around the world by 2030. It should also be noted that these numbers for 2030, they do not consider the impact of the corona pandemic, which is already expected also to negatively affect progress towards SDG 7, but to what extent it cannot be foreseen yet. Well, once people have access to modern energy services, these services can help to improve people's lives in several ways. For example, with access to adequate electricity, education can be improved by using communication technologies. Health centers can refrigerate medicine, provide additional and better services that are simply not possible to be offered without electricity. Economic and agrarian activities can be promoted and help to increase income generation, food security, and so on. Then there are several examples in which we can see that energy is essential for human development and well-being. But the point that I would like to stress with you here is that there is a general expectation that once poor people get access to modern energy services, they are able to take advantage from these services to move out of poverty. And we can see this expectation in science, in public discourse, in the energy access sector. And this expectation is like to imagine that we have a kind of straight road from the access to modern energy services, or from the eradication of energy poverty, towards poverty reduction and improved life conditions. In the real world, however, it seems that the construction of a pathway to move out of poverty seems to be much more complex than the provision of modern energy services for poor people. And in the literature, you can find some studies that have investigated neutral and negative impacts of energy access in rural communities. Cases, for example, in which the arrival of electricity increased, for example, job opportunities for children, leading them to drop out of school. In the project also that Clark mentioned it before about the social value of energy that we conducted together, we have found cases in which energy projects were expected to benefit a certain amount of rural families, and after 2 or 3 years of implementation, the projects were benefiting only few families. And the reason for that was internal conflicts inside the communities. And so few families, they took over the project and they exclude other families as beneficiaries. Another example, if you think about the argument that is widely used in the literature, that energy access increases the access to information by enabling people to use information technologies such as televisions, computers, radios, and cell phones. Every time that I heard this argument, I think that maybe we're not doing the right question here. And for me, one important question relating energy access and access to information is to know which kind of information do rural people have access to via information technologies. Having access to information does not mean that people will have access to adequate information to help them overcome poverty. If information content is spread out in a society is one that reinforces social, economic, and political patterns that reproduce poverty, one of the main impacts that this information may have on people's life, I mean, without a critical reflection, is the acceptance of poverty as something normal of modern societies. And I think that the same can be applied also to education. With access to electricity, rural schools can offer lectures after sunset, which does not mean that the social and economic dynamics of these communities will necessarily improve. As argued also by the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire in his book, Pedagogy of the Present. Maybe you have also already read this book. Lectures in the school environment do not necessarily mean positive impacts on society. And in particular, if this education is based on foundations that generate poverty and the oppression of poor people. And I think that these are some points that we should reflect in the energy access when we are thinking about to provide energy access in rural communities and poor communities to reduce poverty. If you have any question, just let me know and we can also discuss specific topics also in more details. What? Yeah, well, in all this context can then lead us to understand why the eradication of energy poverty, although urgent and necessary, is not enough to lead people out of poverty if the provision of these modern energy services do not consider the dynamic of rural areas in the context, sociocultural, political, economic, environmental, in which people live and these communities exist. This picture here is from the Brazilian rural electrification program Luz para Todos, Light for All, in which you can see a whole environment of poverty, but with electricity. And here is the point in which the energy poverty nexus come in. In a broad sense, we can see the energy poverty nexus as a systematically and dynamic interrelationships between energy and poverty. And in that sense, the lack of access to adequate energy services or overcoming energy poverty can be understood as one piece to solve a more complex puzzle related to the energy poverty nexus. So the idea here is to create a problem between energy and the causes of poverty, aiming to overcome barriers and to create new opportunities for people to increase their capabilities to take more advantage of energy to overcome poverty. And in this way, understand energy as a mechanism to reduce poverty requires approaches that integrate energy and poverty as a complex and multidimensional system. And in such approaches, the context in which people live and these communities exist is of high importance to analyze the conditions in which modern energies can help people actually move out of poverty. And so in this research, we developed an integrative approach to the energy poverty nexus. In simple words, the idea is to understand the local context, create future views relating energy and poverty, identify conditions and strategies that enable society to change pathways in the future, take actions, evaluate, and celebrate. Here, this approach is divided in 4 main steps, but if you wish, you can also segregate these in additional steps. The first step is primarily to understand and characterize this context of the energy poverty nexus. Important questions here are which multidimensional elements are part of this nexus in a specific community, region, or country, which are the current and future trends of these elements. And then here in the second step, the core idea is to interrelate the elements of the energy poverty nexus, how they influence each other. In the third step, we can identify future views and the conditions needed to change pathways if desired. And in the last step is the place to create strategies, take actions, evaluate results, and celebrate. And of course, we can also see these steps as a loop. In my research, we partially applied this approach because we went on to here the step number 3. We will also go into detail on that. And about the specific methods and approaches to be used, this can change according to different realities. So in the case of this research, we used cross-impact balance analysis to identify the elements and trends of the energy poverty nexus in Ceará, their interrelationships, and also to construct here the future views. And then we can see that we use this CIB analysis here in these 3 steps. And then we use it also the concepts related to socio-ecological systems that are here. No, I think it's not here. We also use this here to understand how easy or hard is to change pathways in the future. We will also go into detail on that. However, we can also think about other methods and approaches that can be used here, as for example, participatory learning in action, educational circles, system thinking, causal loop diagrams, and the social value of energy. In this research, since we analyzed the energy poverty nexus considering rural areas of a Brazilian state as a whole, the cross-impact balance analysis has proved to be an adequate method for that. However, if you think to apply to this integrative approach in a specific community, or in a small community, The cross-impact balance analysis may not be the best approach for that. From my point of view, because it is too much academic. And for these cases, for the use this directly in small communities, I would suggest to use participatory learning in action and educational circles or the social value of energy. Let's move on and see how we applied this for the rural areas of Ceará, the case study of this research. Yeah, we applied here the integrative approach to the energy poverty nexus, basically to understand under which conditions renewable energies in form of decentralized energy systems and clean means of cooking could contribute to reduce poverty in the long term in the rural Ceará. Well, Ceará is located in the northeast coast of Brazil in a climate predominantly semi-arid and has a rural population of about 2.1 million people, which represents around 1/4 of the total population in the state. Regarding the size, Ceará is about half the size of the state of Arizona. And in the last 2 decades, Ceará has achieved important advances to reduce poverty and energy poverty in rural areas. In terms of poverty reduction, key was the implementation of social policies, including cash transfer programs, health programs, and infrastructural projects to increase water accessibility and basic sanitation. To emphasize also, this is a semi-arid region, so access to water and adequate water management is of high importance for the state. Well, you are also familiar with these water concerns because you live also in the Arizona. But as far as I know, half of the Arizona is considered semi-arid, and here we have almost the whole state of Ceará located in a semi-arid region. Regarding the reduction of energy poverty, one of the main advances was the universalization of electricity access in 2015, mainly by grid extension and through the electrification program Light for All. I think that also here this is also important also to highlight that this electrification program, the Light for All, is considered around the world as one of the main programs for social inclusion of poor people by providing by the provision of electricity access, and all the equipment needed for the electrification of the households, including outlets and light bulbs inside the homes, everything were provided free of charge for poor rural families. And this electrification program, it universalized electricity access in almost whole Brazil. Currently, the main lack of electricity access is located in the Amazon region. So in general, poor rural families in Ceará, they use electricity to supply basic human needs, lighting, food, refrigeration, and communication, but seldom for productive chains, poor people. And because if you think about large farmers, of course, they have a completely other electricity supply, and they, of course, they are able also to use electricity in a more productive way. Regarding food cooking, rural families in Ceará, in general, they use 2 types of cook stoves, one based on liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, and another based on biomass. So there are some meals that the families, they prefer to prepare in the traditional biomass cook stoves, which of course cause high internal air pollution. And also the families, they tend to use more the traditional biomass cook stoves in times of economic crisis or when the families are running financial difficulties. We have some initiatives in the state towards the use of clean cooking facilities using biogas and improved cook stoves based on biomass, but this is not the majority. Frequently, these initiatives are led by NGOs. I have also some pictures at the end of this presentation about biogas facilities that Mary Jane and I have visited last year in Ceará. And yeah, well, although advances have been achieved to reduce energy poverty in the state, especially regarding the access to electricity, we should also note that Ceará is still one of the poorest Brazilian states with high level of socioeconomic inequalities. We should also note that the state has one of the biggest potential for renewable energies in form of solar and wind energy. And of course, this was also one of the reasons for our research question. Since there is this huge potential for renewable energies, we are interested to know under which conditions this kind of energy may contribute to alleviate rural poverty in the state. Yeah, we applied this integrative approach to the energy poverty nexus that I explained a few slides ago. And for the identification of the elements that compose the nexus, as well as for the identification of possible future trends and for the construction of the future views of the whole system, we used participatory approaches involving community members and stakeholders. Yeah, and for that we used the method of the cross impact balance analysis. Here, a very short also overview about CIB, cross impact balance analysis. CIB is a systematic scenario methodology based on expert judgments of interrelationships between descriptors and their possible variants of future trends that contextualize a determined system, which normally involves multi-dimensions. The first step to conduct a CIB analysis is to determine the set of descriptors and future trends that contextualize the system under analysis. And the next step, we define the interrelationships between these descriptors. So for example, here we have the descriptor A that influences D and C and is influenced also by C. And once we have defined all these interrelationships, we can quantify them, and for that we normally use a scale from -3 to +3, from hinder to promote. And once we have all the interrelationships are quantified, we will have composed a CIB matrix. And using this matrix, we can calculate the impact of the interrelationships considering the whole system, identify consistent scenarios, and create storylines for these scenarios. So if you compare all these steps with the integrative approach, you will see that you can use the CIB in the 3 first steps of the integrative approach without any problem. Yeah, and then this is the last part to write these storylines. So these are the elements that we have identified for the energy poverty nexus in rural Ceará, as well as their interrelationships. In total, we have here 16 elements from different natures. So we have considered here, for example, household infrastructure, rural policies, education, different ways in which renewable energies may have more penetration in the energy market, different forms of irrigation, the grid infrastructure is also considered here, and so on. And for each one of these elements, they have from 2 or 3 different future states. For example, if we look to indoor air pollution, we imagine 2 trends for the future. One is high indoor air pollution. That would mean the maintenance of the status quo. And we can also imagine a low level of indoor air pollution by the adoption of clean energy technologies based on biomass, biogas, or solar, for example. If you think about the way in which farmers are organized, we can imagine weak cooperation that also represent the current situation, but also a strong cooperation in which the farmers, they get together in favor of a common objective. And in that way, each one of these elements have different future trends. And the timeline that we have here is 2050. After we have established all the level of interrelationships, we arrived in the, just a minute, I'm trying to change the slide. Too fast, yeah, here. And after we have then established all these interrelationships, we arrived in a CIB matrix and calculate the impact of these interrelationships. Here I prefer also not to show this matrix because it's hard to understand only in one slide, but I have also it at the end of this presentation in case that you are also interested in. Basically, it is a matrix with many numbers, many interconnections that represent how the trends of the elements of this whole system here are interconnected. Once we have calculated the impact of the trends, we arrived in 30 scenarios. And these 30 scenarios, we grouped them according to different divergent trends that can be driving forces in the scenarios, resulting in 5 clusters of scenarios, of 5 future views about the energy poverty nexus in Ceará. And for each one of these clusters, we have constructed then storylines. And now we will then go into detail on these storylines. So this is the first one, conservative. And this storyline represents the status quo in Ceará. The main driving forces here are non-adequate governance, combined with limited capacity building and education. A non-adequate governance here is primarily characterized as a governance that gives little attention to reduce privileges from upper classes and little attention to promote disadvantaged social groups. We should see here this governance more from a national perspective in Brazil, and to some extent also considering the state government in Ceará. And a limited education here is characterized as an education focusing on the urban perspective. And in this sense, rural people are in general educated in a perspective in which urban areas means progress and development, while rural areas are considered underdeveloped, poor, and backward. In addition, we should also note that a limited education means also here, in general, only the primary school that is available in rural areas. And if rural people in Ceará want to pursue higher education, they need to go to the city. And these 2 driving forces will trigger the development of additional factors that will hinder poor people to take advantage of renewable energies to move out of poverty. In this sense, poverty is expected to remain constant or to increase due to inappropriate social and political conditions, but we will also see this in more details. So a non-adequate governance can increase the access for basic services like the universalization of water supply and electricity for basic needs, especially in times of economic stability. And such actions, of course, will improve the life conditions of poor people, but they are not enough to change the status quo that generate poverty and high inequalities in Brazil. A non-adequate governance is also expected to design policies that will continue benefiting primarily groups that are already in a better social and economic position, similar to the current agrarian policies in Brazil that focus on monocultures and large farming. And for poor families, for poor rural families, this means policies of limited opportunities for them. Rural policies focusing on large farming will also contribute to a limited capacity building and education among poor people. And both of them will promote poor irrigation management in rural Ceará, causing soil salinization and land degradation. The limited education and capacity building associated with a non-adequate governance will continue to promote the current distressed environment among small farmers in collaborative organizations, so as they remain disarticulated. And this weak cooperation among small farmers and their low level of instruction will have negative impacts on income sources and asset accumulation, which can also be intensified by economic crisis and environmental risks and uncertainties caused by, yeah, I heard something. No? Okay. If there is any question, just feel free to interrupt me, yeah? Yeah, and these income sources here will also be influenced here by major environmental risks and uncertainties and unstable economy. The low financial resilience of poor people, the lack of adequate policies and limited education will contribute to keep high the cost of electricity in cooking fuels and promote the use of unhealthy means of cooking. And this overall, in this sense, then high indoor air pollution remains a problem in rural areas of Ceará. In this overall context, we expect that the use of decentralized energy systems using solar and wind technologies will increase in the state, but we don't expect that poor rural communities will be able to profit from or have access to different market structures that can promote the use of renewable energies in Ceará. And in this sense, low resilience of income sources, limited education, weak cooperation of farmers and limited rural policies and limited also grid infrastructure represent economic, social, political, and technical conditions in this storyline that that will prevent poor people from profiting from decentralized energy generation. Yeah, in a similar way, we can also see this in a similar way as the rural policies, in which we expect that the increased use of wind and solar energy will primarily benefit people from upper classes, such as big farmers and private investors. Finally, we can say that this storyline so integrates a context in which poor families do not have appropriate conditions and opportunities to take advantage of modern energy services to get out of poverty. And this will also lead to keep the current trend regarding rural demography, in which we expect a slight decrease of the rural population, like nowadays. And yeah, this is then the whole picture that we have for this first storyline that represent more or less the status quo in Ceará. We cannot say that this is the status quo, because currently we need also to achieve mainly here universal water supply, and this is not the reality yet in the state. Yeah. Our second storyline that we have created here for the energy poverty nexus in rural Ceará, we name it this migration. And it's quite similar to the first storyline in several aspects. So we expect that the use of renewable energies in form of solar and wind for electricity generation will increase in the state, but the overall context will not allow poor people in general to take advantage from these renewable energies to get out of poverty. And the crucial difference that we have in this storyline that differs from the first one is that here we expect high environmental risk and uncertainties caused by climate change, and also by the use of non-adequate agricultural activities that lead to soil degradation, such as poor irrigation management. And this will inhibit poor people to produce in their lands. So here we expect then migration flows of poor people from rural areas to urban centers in Ceará or other Brazilian regions. Here I think also that it is important also to note that migration flows would not be something new in Ceará. In the 90s and years before, rural Ceará was strongly marked by poverty and hunger, leading to massive migration. And the monetary stabilization in 94 and increased investments in social policies from 2003, this was essential to stop migration flows in the state. And this is then the whole picture that we have for this second storyline. Moving on to our next storyline. This we name it as a failed transition. We can also start from the first story, conservative. And the crucial difference between this storyline and the first one is an adequate governance, which is expected to create institutional reforms aiming to reduce social and economic inequalities. Consequently, such an adequate governance is expected to contradict the status quo that generate poverty and inequalities in the country, as well as the interest of dominant social groups that support this status quo. However, one should also note that these groups in general are also those that hold economic power in the country. And this can lead to a conflicting situation between adequate governance and dominant social groups, because these groups will try to hinder governmental actions to poor to keep their privileges and the status quo of inequalities. And in such a context, an adequate governance can achieve some progress to benefit poor people, such as the universalization of water, basic sanitation, and electricity supply. Nevertheless, this conflicting situation between adequate governance and dominant social groups will lead in this story to economic instability. Under an environment of economic instability, upper classes, of course, they will be negatively affected, but they are much more prepared to overcome crises than lower classes. And in this environment of economic instability and limited education and capacity building, as we foreseen here, it becomes also easier for upper classes also to get the support from lower classes to change, simple to change the government. And in that way, this storyline is considered as a failed transition, because although the intention of the government to push reforms aiming for development with more equality, this government is not likely to succeed with the implementation of these reforms. We can also see similarities between this storyline and what happened in Brazil in the 60s, and to some extent also to what happened in the country 4 years ago. In the 60s, the elected government announced basic reforms, including educational and land reform. And these reforms, in particular the land reform, found a strong resistance in Congress and also amongst dominant sectors in civil society, that contributed significantly to the military coup in '64, supported as well by the United States. And the reforms proposed by the government on that time were not implemented, and Brazil lived under a military dictatorship until '85. And yeah, so this is then the whole picture that we have here for this third storyline, a failed transition. Moving on to our next story, a transition through the contextualized education. In this storyline, we have three main drivers that are non-adequate governance, a stable economy, and a contextualized education and capacity building. In particular, the combination of the trends non-adequate governance and stable economy is interesting in this story, because under a stable economy, even non-adequate governance can enlarge policies that can increase opportunities for poor people. The program Light for All that universalized access to electricity in Ceará and in Brazil as a whole can be considered as an example of a large energy policy created under an environment of stable economy and large corruption. And in a similar way, I'm trying to change here the slide. Capacity building and I'm not getting here the point here to move. Yeah, I think that now, yeah, in a similar way, the education and capacity building in rural areas can also be improved for the reality of these areas, yeah. And a contextualized education means here a shift in the current education in rural areas, and implies the problematization of the sociocultural, political, and economic reality in this in which rural people live. And this is a process that needs to occur with poor rural people and not for these people. Inclusivity is of high importance here. And in this sense, poor rural people should be the main actors in such a contextualized education in their communities. Through the contextualized education and capacity building, poor rural families in Ceará are expected to problematize the energy poverty nexus in their communities, and to define also new strategies that can lead them to use renewable energies as a mechanism for poverty reduction. And one possible strategy that could be adopted is the strong cooperation of farmers, which combined with contextualized education and improved rural policies can improve agricultural practices and improve also income generation, which is also influenced by an unstable economy. The better income, better education, and improved policies are expected here in this storyline to reduce energy costs in rural Ceará and increase also the use of technologies for clean cooking including LPG, biogas, solar, and improved cook stoves based on biomass. In addition, also engaged farmers and communities with enhanced opportunities in terms of policies and grid infrastructure. They are also expected to increase the access, to renewable energies for electricity generation. The possibility also of managing environmental risk and uncertainties, combined also with additional opportunities for poor people, are expected to turn also rural areas more attractive, especially for young people. And so this is the whole picture that we have here for our storyline S4. And in summary, we can see that this storyline indicates the possibility for poor rural people, even under a non-adequate governance, to join efforts, plan strategies, and grasp new opportunities to access and use renewable energies to enhance the quality of life and reduce poverty in their communities. However, we should also highlight that this storyline is very also sensitive to economic stability. Our last story, A Way Towards Poverty Reduction, is similar to the previous one, but here we have a main difference. In S5, we have an adequate governance that, together with a contextualized education, represent the main driving forces of this story, which is also more resilient to economic instability if compared with the previous story. The combination of these driving forces, adequate governance, contextualized education, highlight also the importance also of having people aware of their socio-cultural, political, and economic reality to foster, together with an adequate governance, a less unequal society with no poverty. And consequently, also this storyline presents also the best conditions for poor people and society to use renewable energies in form of decentralized energy systems and clean means of cooking as a mechanism of poverty reduction in rural Ceará. So if you look to our 5 storylines together, we can also segregate these storylines in 2 pathways. In the first pathway, composed of the storylines S1 conservative, S2 migration, and S3 a failed transition, poverty is expected to remain constant or to increase with the support of modern and renewable energies. And in these storylines, social groups that are already in a better economic position or are politically well represented are expected also to take more advantage of renewable energies than poor and marginalized people, maintaining the status quo of poverty and high inequalities in the state. The results of this study indicate that rural areas of Ceará are currently following this pathway, in particularly the storyline S2 conservative. In the second pathway, composed of the storylines S4, transition through the contextualized education, and S5, A Way Towards Poverty Reduction, poverty is expected to reduce with the support of decentralized and renewable energy systems and clean cooking facilities. Since these storylines present conditions in which poor people are expected to take more advantage of renewable energy technologies to reduce poverty in rural Ceará. So now I think that we can also ask how easy or hard is to change pathways in the future. So if Ceará is currently following this storyline, which are the main conditions needed to move the energy poverty nexus to the storylines S4 or S5 that are part of the second pathway. And this question is part of the step 3 of the integrative approach to the energy poverty nexus. And to answer this question, we use it in adapted concepts related to resilience, transformability, and adaptability of socio-ecological systems. Basically, this concepts say that a system tends to remain stable inside a domain of attraction. Please don't see this as a picture of an XY graphic. Imagine this as a valleys or domains of attraction. And under the occurrence of slight disturbances, the system can change its position inside the same domain and remain stable. And that means that the main functions or characteristics of these systems do not change. Under the occurrence, under the occurrence of a strong disturbance, the system can move and adapt itself to a new situation and remain stable inside the same domain of attraction. And that means that in this new situation, A3 is less resilient than A1 and A2, because it is also closer to the system borders, but it is still the same system and with the same functions, only adapting to a new situation that is more vulnerable. However, this system can also suffer such a strong disturbance that make it loses resilience inside domain A. Yeah, inside domain A, leading to instability. And in this way, the system loses its main functions and is transformed in a new system inside a new domain of attraction. Therefore, here in the system B1 is a new system and do not more represent anymore system A. And in this new system, B is stable inside the domain B and can only move again to the domain A if the system suffers a strong disturbance able to lead the system loses its resilience inside the domain B. Yeah, so we use these ideas also for our storylines. So we start here from our first storyline as one conservative. This system is stable inside the first pathway, representing the continuance of poverty with the support of modern and renewable energies. The main drivers of this story are non-adequate governance and limited education and capacity building. And this system is stable inside these conditions. And in that way, we expect that the use of renewable energies for the electricity generation, in particular from wind and solar, will increase in Ceará, but we don't expect that poor people will benefit from them. Well, this is not expected only for the case of S1, but for all the storylines that are part of this first pathway. So from S1, the energy poverty nexus can suffer disturbances that can lead it to follow the storylines S2 and S3. That means to follow S2 migration, we have the occurrence of high environmental risk and uncertainties that lead the systems to a new stable position inside the same pathway. And to follow S3, the main change that we have in comparison to S2 is an adequate governance in comparison to S1, sorry. But here we expect a conflicting situation between an adequate governance and those that hold economic power in the country, leading to economic instability. So this is also the reason why also the storyline S3 is also less resilient than S1 or S2. However, the energy poverty nexus can also suffer disturbances that lead our system to instability inside the first pathway, transforming it in a new system inside a new pathway with adequate social and political conditions that should enable for people develop new capacities to take more advantage of renewable energies to move out of poverty. So from S1, S2, or S3, we can go to S4, mainly promoting a contextualized education. And if we change an additional parameter related to an adequate governance, then we can move the system to the new pathway of the storyline S5. And in S5, the resilience of the system is expected to be bigger than in S4, but we need much more efforts to move the system from S1, S2, or S3 to S5, than to move to the system to the storyline S4. Finally, I think that also is important here to highlight that the energy poverty nexus, if we move this nexus to a new pathway in which poverty is reduced with the support of modern energies, there is no guarantee that our system will stay on that pathway. We can also have in the future events or developments that set back progresses and can move the system again to the first pathway. Yeah, and this is a challenging situation. Yeah, if we are able to move our system that currently is here to this second pathway for one of these S4 or S5, is also challenging also to keep this system also running inside of these pathways. In this sense, it seems also that the storyline S4 is also more easy to be achieved. We have also cases of rural communities in Ceará, and I believe that our next project that we will also lead in Brazilian Amazon together with you, that community is also more or less also inside this storyline. Because as far as I know, I think that Mary Jane can also complement on that. How is her perception on the community? The community seems to be very well organized. And actually, this new project that we will conduct in the Brazilian Amazon will be led also by the community. So this is one of the main, for me, is one of the main important points in this project, is that the community will manage the whole project. Yeah, I think that they will also develop several new capabilities by managing this new project. Yeah, so in that sense, I think that it's more easy to move the energy poverty nexus first for the storyline S4, and then from here to come to S5. Coming to the closing remarks. Modern and renewable energies are helpful to reduce poverty, but only the eradication of energy poverty is not enough to make people move out of poverty. It's also of how important is also to keep in mind that renewable energies or the energy axis can also have not only positive impacts, but neutral or negative impacts on poverty reduction. And in the sense that we want also to maximize these positive impacts, it's of high importance also that we lead, that we involve in the energy access sector in rural communities with a systematic and participatory approach that consider this energy poverty nexus as a systematic in a complex system. And finally, although this study suggests that rural Ceará in general is following our storyline SC2, a new pathway is possible, yeah, in which also people then can are able to take more advantage of renewable energies. So I think that now I talked too much. Thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I'm happy to discuss with you points that are not clear or that you would like to have a more in-depth discussion.